As the judge rendered the final decision, the courtroom was filled with the sound of labored breathing. The weight of the punishment caused Rick Harrison and Austin Chumley Russell to collapse in astonishment. Once heralded as the living encyclopedia of reality television, Rick's surprise life sentence without parole startled the entire United States. The picture of him being silently led out of the courthouse while handcuffed swiftly rose to the top of the week's sharing count. Please remember to press the notification bell, like and subscribe to the channel if you thought this tale was interesting and startling. This will ensure that you don't miss any more videos. To get more unreleased information about this case, show your friends this video. Don't forget to post your opinions in the comments box. Rick Harrison, a hitherto unseen dark side. The decision was not the only thing that surprised the people. The major focus was Rick's impetuous and irate response in court, which stood in sharp contrast to the composed manner he had exhibited throughout his career. Rick forcefully questioned the judge and the prosecution, slamming the table in an unprecedented heated exchange. He was formerly regarded as a representation of wisdom and moral business practices, but he was now charged with running a global network engaged in tax fraud, money laundering, and artifact smuggling. He was now in danger of losing the impeccable reputation he had worked so hard to establish over the last 15 years. The case generated a lot of discussion among spectators and in academic circles. Was this a part of a bigger plot that hasn't been discovered yet? Or was it the downfall of a cultural icon? And what exactly was going through Rick Harrison's head as the verdict was read? That was the question that kept coming up in everyone's minds. Rick Harrison, the television journalist who tells history. Rick has enthralled viewers with rare antiques and his ability to give each piece life, as though narrating a dramatic historical tale, ever since Pawn Stars debuted in February 2009. Whether it's a Roman coin or a map from the 18th century, he immediately transports spectators to its history, significance and context, giving the impression that he is more than simply a businessman. Rather, he is a steward of tradition, a scholar masquerading as an entrepreneur. In a time where the media frequently eclipses knowledge, Rick became a unique personality. He once remarked, "I know what I'm doing, and I know I'm always right," demonstrating his great insight and calm manner. It was more than a declaration. It was a lifestyle that helped him get through challenging times. Knowledge, in Rick's opinion, is a defense against every danger. Ironically, though, that exact conviction would ultimately serve as the binding factor in his destiny. Rick had developed an emotional immunity mechanism as a result of his success in the antiquities trade, which protected him from accusations, market hazards, and even rivals' envy. However, such armor was unable to rescue him this time. Everything was coming apart, and the man who had previously been respected for his composure and extensive knowledge suddenly had to deal with the biggest obstacle of his life. Sometimes as sharp as a sword, and other times as unwavering as a stone wall, Rick approached every obstacle in life with icy reason and reasoning. He developed a strong armor over time to protect himself from unfiltered emotion. Rick became adept at concealing everything with a severe expression and a monotonous voice. Rick turned into a conundrum in the realm of reality TV, where feelings are frequently exaggerated. He drew more attention the quieter he was. However, it was this long-term repression of feelings that caused his unbalance, silent arrogance, and naive conviction that he was unbeatable. The initial indications of the crisis. Then one day there were murmurs. Rick was allegedly the subject of a federal investigation for tax fraud and dealing in unregistered antiques, according to an unsubstantiated social media post. His response, a half-smile of contempt. "This will pass." This was no comfort to Rick. It was the statement of someone who thought the law did not apply to them. He believed this to be just another fleeting media storm, and he had spent decades learning to brush allegations aside as mere noise. However, he was mistaken, and that error signaled the start of the trust crisis. Psychologically speaking, Rick's response was not unexpected, and too robust ego protection mechanism is frequently developed by those who spend too much time in the spotlight of authority, influence, and adoration. They see the world as a riddle that they know the answer to. They overlook the shift in other people's eyes, the hesitancy of reporters' inquiries, or the mounting skepticism. Rick was no exception. He remained silent as the investigation facts became more apparent. No explanation, no legal reply, no news conference. This quiet was dubbed composure by many. Psychologically speaking, however, it was a type of emotional paralysis, which is a characteristic of those who find it difficult to accept the breakdown of their worldview. Calmness was no longer a tactic for Rick. It turned into a coping strategy that made him less conscious of the impending threat. Ironically, he was oblivious to his own limits because of his prior achievements. The guy who had earlier handled every discussion with assurance now had to deal with a verdict that was beyond his wildest expectations. Two opposing lines of thought were running concurrently in Rick's thoughts. One held on to the hope that he was innocent, or at least misinterpreted, while the other silently tormented him, his uneasiness becoming increasingly obvious. Though he hadn't displayed it externally, emotional resistance started to develop. Rick continued to visit the store frequently, interacting with employees and capturing pictures of customers. However, the customary sharpness had vanished from his gaze. Rather, uncertainty and bewilderment prevailed, and that small fissure in his mental armor started to widen. A legend's demise. The terrible morning of April. Then the crack was no longer little on a bright April morning. Rick thought he was untouchable, but it ripped through his impenetrable armor. The world watched as an idol fell when he was arrested. Not because he was irrational, but rather because he disregarded the feelings that were telling him to do otherwise. He believed he was above the law, not because he didn't comprehend it. However, nobody remains at the top indefinitely, particularly when the mountain below them starts to fall apart. The sun was still shining in the Las Vegas sky in February 2023, when an unmarked black convoy came to a quiet halt in front of the gold and silver pawn store, the location where Rick Harrison's name had been associated for more than 20 years. Silently, people in black uniforms with gleaming badges entered the building without any fanfare or sirens. Rick's routine existence ended in a matter of minutes. Agents from the U.S. Department of Cultural Heritage, the FBI, and the IRS escorted him out. Freedom was a faraway memory, yet his hands were not in handcuffs. There was only a thick, oppressive silence. No outcry, no resistance. Some employees used their phones to record the event as they sobbed inside the store. Those videos became viral on social media within hours. The arrest itself wasn't shocking. Rather, Rick's behavior was there was no sign of hatred or indignation, just calm and collected. He moved as though he were entering a stage he had seen before. There was a silent pride on his face, as if he were performing the lead in a scenario he had practiced 100 times. The psychologists were drawn to its uncanny quietness. They hypothesized that Rick could be exhibiting high-level emotional detachment, which is a normal psychological reaction to extreme shock. In order to safeguard the intellect, the brain momentarily postpones emotional responses in this condition. Rick might not have completely understood at the time of his arrest that he was being called a criminal, after previously being seen as a model of wisdom and moral business. Icy manner. Emotional paralysis or strategy. Rick was almost silent during the search and early questioning. Just brief, controlled answers. No confession, no opposition. He handled his look carefully. That conduct simply clarified one thing. Until the very last, Rick was working to maintain his public persona. However, the issue still stands was that actual strength, or the silent warning of an impending inward collapse. There were two conflicting waves of popular response to Rick's arrest. Using hashtags like Frerick, his fans rallied on one side and accused him of being the target of a political witch hunt. Skeptics, on the other hand, who had long doubted the openness of his transactions, now used this instance as proof of misconduct. A flurry of public opinion erupted in YouTube comment sections, Twitter conversations, and Reddit threads. Rick's quiet has been construed in a variety of ways, either as a premeditated maneuver, or evidence of his emotional exhaustion. Family. An unshared burden. This was an unthinkable blow to Rick's family, particularly to his oldest son Corey, who was supposed to take over the store. Corey found it difficult to talk during a brief interview following the arrest. "I have no idea what's going on. My father never committed any wrongdoing. That's what I think, anyhow." The sincere affection of a son and the emotional distance Rick had established by bearing his problems alone were both evident in his statements. The months-long probe was unknown to the family. That indicates that Rick either decided no one else needed to know, or decided to endure it all in silence. Chumley and the group of history specialists, who were longtime co-workers and personal friends of Chumley, were caught completely off guard. According to an unnamed buddy, Rick was extremely serious and careful. "I'm at a loss for what to believe if he is guilty." Faith in Rick was communal, not merely individual. He was the epitome of the American success story, integrity. His demise shattered the entire core of cultural trust, making it more than just a legal failure. Rick was released on conditional bail shortly after his arrest. He stopped using social media and refused to be interviewed by the media. Rick disappeared from the public view for the first time in more than 15 years. According to contemporary psychology, this absence is an obvious indication of a broken soul. Rick seemed to have what psychologists refer to as functional depression following the initial shock. In this condition, a person feels empty, nervous and reclusive on the inside, yet they are nonetheless able to work, communicate, and carry out everyday duties. Rick still spent a few hours a day at the store, but he no longer welcomed customers or spoke to employees like he used to. The Pawn Stars cast's advertising posters had vanished, and the store's interior security cameras had been removed. The eerie ambiance of gold and silver pawn now feels chilly and empty, reflecting the inner torment that consumed the guy who constructed it. Trial preparation and mounting legal pressure. Although the trial preparation was conducted in quiet, it was extremely stressful. From tax evasion involving undeclared objects to the use of third parties to purchase and sell alleged stolen antiques, prosecutors presented a number of devastating pieces of evidence. Rick's legal team found it difficult to dispute every claim since the case file became more and more complex every day. In the meantime, the presumption of guilt was becoming more and more popular. However, Rick was still impacted even if he remained silent. Instead, it might have been the culmination of a long-brewing emotional crisis. According to the psychological phases after loss model developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Rick could be moving into the bargaining stage, which is entwined with feelings of self-blame. Behind closed doors, he could have been wondering, did I trust myself too much? Have there ever been times when I veered off course without seeing it? He knew deep down that the answer was yes, and it haunted him every day. Unexpectedly, Rick claimed to be a victim of a political plot when he appeared on a number of conservative talk stations. He maintained that a strict system had used him as a scapegoat because of his achievements and unusual ascent. This tactic was well thought out and exposed flaws in his reasoning. Rick started using conspiracy theories as a buffer from the harsh truth, abandoning his reliance on reason. Change in the mind. Rick was no longer the same. Rick was no longer the witty guy who enjoyed narrating the backstory of every object or the one who grinned through every little transaction at this time. He had changed. He was now cautious, reclusive, and removed from the very group that had formerly held him in high regard. He gradually lost his public connection. The largest storm in Rick's life started to approach as their trust was broken. Rick Harrison's trial was held in the Federal Court of Nevada on February 12, 2025. In the history of American reality television, this was regarded as one of the most famous criminal trials. Permission to report live from outside the courthouse was given to more than 60 domestic and foreign media outlets. Rick, who had thought he was unbeatable, was now facing the truth, the ultimate abyss, and the verdict was drawing near. On the first day, almost 200 persons filled the Nevada federal courtroom, including legal experts, heritage conservation campaigners, representatives from worldwide museums, and a few Pawn Stars enthusiasts selected by lottery. 11 witnesses from the prosecution and 4 from the defense testified throughout the 18-day trial. The legal storm, the litany of charges. Richard Kevin Harrison was charged with 23 crimes by the prosecution, including 7 counts of tax evasion, 6 counts of money laundering, 4 counts of illegal cultural artifact trafficking, 3 counts of obstruction of evidence, and 3 counts of accounting fraud. A roughly 14-month investigation by the FBI, IRS, and Department of Cultural Heritage Protection supported these claims. Rick was cooperated with his legal team over the first several days of the trial, The pivotal moment came on day 6, though, when the prosecution presented both electronic and tangible evidence, such as internal emails, encrypted conversation recordings, unreported invoices, and a double-entry ledger system that recorded untaxed transactions totaling more than $12 million. Rick's surprising response. Prosecutor William H. Decca's disclosure of a string of encrypted communications between Rick and a foreign artifact dealer in Spain on day 6 marked a sea change. The text spoke of a plan to hide the provenance of a military paper from a British institution from the 18th century that had a seal on it. Rick got up abruptly and protested loudly as the messages came on the big screen. Rick was adamant on speaking up, despite the efforts of defense lawyer David Marshall to silence him. "Seldom have I gotten anything that was marked as stolen. The prosecution is purposefully misinterpreting this." Judge Michael K. Davidson told him to sit down right away, but Rick persisted. "Who would stand up for my honor then? Before my trial ever got a chance, the media found me guilty." To reduce tension, the court recessed for 45 minutes. The mood in the courtroom became much more strained after that. The legitimacy of the evidence, especially the data acquired from Rick's personal phone, which the defense said had been accessed unlawfully, was a topic of constant discussion between the two legal teams. The prosecution concentrated on Rick's alleged manipulation of the accounting system from day 9 to day 13. More than 173 antiques, each worth $5,000 to $80,000, were taken out of the official inventory and only showed up in a secret ledger that was concealed in his own office. Please remember to press the notification bell, like and subscribe to the channel if you found this story to be both frightening and intriguing. This will ensure that you don't miss any future videos. To learn the truth about this case, show your friends this video. We'll keep an eye on this lawsuit's development and jointly investigate any fresh information. The hazy beginnings and the connection to artifact crime. While many of the objects still lacked verified legal ownership, several were linked to robberies in museums in Florida, Texas, and West Virginia. The defense said that third persons who were not involved in the shop's formal activities independently exchanged these things. On the other hand, the prosecution came up with a surveillance tape that was time-stamped in August 2021 and showed Rick directly telling employees to segregate and store particular things without entering them into the inventory system. On day 16, lawyer David Marshall again asked that the cultural property charges be dropped, claiming that there was insufficient proof that Rick knew about the illicit origins. The judge, however, denied this request, ruling that the absence of responsibility in significant transactions over a long period of time is enough to prove organized crime. As the trial went on, Rick Harrison's reputation became more and more vulnerable to the mounting evidence. The last words, a hush, a moment of recognition. Rick Harrison was given the opportunity to address the court on the last day of the trial. He acknowledged that I could have let my feelings and experiences influence how I understood legal concepts, even if he did not enter a guilty plea. The duration of his remarks was 4 minutes. The court then made the decision to postpone the trial for 48 hours in order to give it more time to be considered. At exactly 9 in the morning on March 3, 2025, the courtroom was full. Rick Harrison was given a life sentence without the possibility of release by Judge Michael K. Davidson, who noted that his acts were deliberate, protracted, and seriously damaging to the country's cultural legacy. Rick's response was forceful. "This is not justice," he said as he leaped to his feet, smashed his fist on the table, and pointed at the prosecutor. Security guards stepped in right away and told him to stop. In order to seek for mercy, attorney David Marshall asked for both an appeal and a postponement of punishment. However, both requests were turned down. The most circulated moment of the week was swiftly the picture of Rick in a gray suit, handcuffed, and being led out of the courthouse by dozens of cameras. A YouTube video of the punishment received over 9 million views in only 48 hours. Rick was moved to the Federal Correctional Complex, a high-security non-paroleable prison in Victorville, California. He was barred from speaking to the media and from writing a book while he was in prison as part of the conditions of his sentence. The domino effect and appeal. Rick's legal team appealed the life sentence 3 weeks later, claiming it was too severe for someone who had no violent past, no criminal record, and no prior convictions. A decision has not yet been rendered by the appellate court. Nonetheless, the case's cultural and legal effects persisted in spreading. Within 24 hours following the judgment, Rick Harrison's trial became the most talked about issue on all major American media platforms, including Google Trends, YouTube, and Twitter. Over 40 million searches were made for the keyword Rick Harrison life sentence in the first 3 days, exceeding even well-known cases like as Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard in 2022. News platforms and cable stations repeatedly broadcast the video of Rick being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. In the first week, the courtroom video, in which he banged the table and attacked the justice system, had over 12 million views. The trial became an unofficial political drama of America as the media scrutinized every word, every attitude, and even the quiet moments. Public and specialists are split in society. Collide. The public's response was rather split. The devoted Pawn Stars followers, who saw Rick as a pop culture superstar, were on one side and started internet campaigns demanding that the sentence be changed. Historians, heritage conservation groups, and the global museum community, on the other hand, released a unified statement endorsing the decision. This sentence sets the necessary legal precedent to prevent the illegal trafficking of cultural heritage regardless of fame or status, the American Assets Protection Association, or APA, said. Following the trial, Rick was taken off of lists of cultural sponsors, and a number of academic institutions and media outlets cut off their connections with Pawn Stars. The only family member to speak up was his son Corey Harrison, who was in charge of gold and silver pawn for the time being. "I don't deny that what my father did was wrong, but with his contributions to culture, he deserves a chance to make things right," Corey said at a brief news conference in Las Vegas. The message struck a powerful chord with unbiased audiences and swiftly went viral. Worldwide response, the influence beyond national boundaries. Outside the Pawn Stars store, which remained run by Corey, some fan clubs even set up candlelight vigils. The story quickly gained international attention. Newspapers throughout Europe, including Le Monde in France and Der Spiegel in Germany, saw the case as a wake-up call on the brittle boundary between culture and business in the era of reality TV. Local authorities in South Korea and Japan, two nations that have previously shown items from porn stars, have renewed investigations into transactions connected to the show. Officially jailed at a medium-security federal penitentiary in Victorville, Rick Harrison was once a representative of a cultural icon of American television. Even if he doesn't say anything while incarcerated, the controversy, criticism, and conflict keep coming, leading to a thorough rethinking of power, society, and ethics in the era of reality TV. Currently completing his sentence, Rick is housed in an institution for long-term non-violent criminals. Rick is categorized as a level 3 inmate, which means that he is seen as non-threatening, extremely self-disciplined, and permitted to have limited communication with the outside world, according to records from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Rick has turned down every interview request during the first 3 weeks, according to his attorneys, but he does not object to the terms of his incarceration. Rick remained entirely mute with the outside world for the first 3 weeks, not even writing letters or making phone calls. He spent much of his time in the prison library, reading books about federal criminal law and ancient history, according to prison guards. A weighty unsaid hush that reflected the inner closure of a man who had lived in front of millions of cameras. Something started to shift subtly by the 4th week. Rick began answering letters. At first, these were just straightforward cards with well wishes from schoolchildren. Later, however, viewers in their middle years wrote lengthy messages explaining how Pawn Stars had taught them about history. Rick was profoundly affected by a few of these letters. Although he had not yet replied, an anonymous mailroom employee claimed that Rick carefully read each letter, marking specific portions and storing some for himself. Controlled autobiography. Horned is the name. Rick's formal request for authorization to write a book was another noteworthy event. Horned, The Story I Never Told, was the tentative title. All commercial publications created by prisoners are subject to stringent control under federal law. This action, meanwhile, suggested that Rick was trying to restore his voice, possibly as a first step in repairing his reputation, rather than out of defiance. All contracts with Rick Harrison and Pawn Stars were terminated. The History Channel stated at the same time, every Rick starring episode was removed from both the internet and the broadcast schedule. This extraordinary move in American reality television was viewed as a last resort to preserve sponsors' credibility and avoid harm to their reputations. A cautionary story of idol to anti-hero. Whether in a good or bad way, Rick's impact keeps growing. According to some media analysts, Rick now personifies the pop culture anti-hero paradigm, which may create fresh opportunities for reinventing one's personal brand following a crisis. The crucial question is still whether Rick Harrison can change from a convicted criminal to a beacon of cultural caution for coming generations. Following the decision, scholars and heritage conservation specialists started speaking out on a long-simmering issue, the thin line separating the advancement of historical knowledge from its use for profit. Once a demonstration of the power to make history accessible to the general public, the Rick Harrison case is today a shining example of moral decay in which individual gain took precedence above cultural purpose. More than 60 schools and institutions in the US and Canada used Pawn Stars as an additional teaching tool for history classes for more than 10 years. However, that function was questioned following the case, not only because of Rick Harrison but also because of the system as a whole, which had previously praised him as a model history narrator. This incident was a wake-up call for the media and the school system, not just the downfall of a single person. Rick Harrison had previously had a prominent position in the disciplines of media, applied history, and commercial economics. In 2016, the Smithsonian Institution and the American Historical Association invited him to speak at industry conferences because of his vast expertise. In the same year, the National Museum of American History presented him with the Cultural Citizenship Award. However, it wasn't only a criminal case that led to his collapse, it was an agonizing reminder of a time when cultural values were viewed as commodities to be sold on the black market of intelligence, and education was commodified by the media. Knowledge as a weapon. Scholarly analysis. According to an analysis by Columbia University professor Marcus Halberstam, Rick Harrison had such a profound understanding of history that he was able to take use of it. But when that information was unrestricted by moral principles, it turned into a harmful instrument. He said that Rick's behavior was a reflection of a system rather than a transient error on his part. In the gray market of collectibles, where commercial value trumped historical value, a number of coordinated actions were taken, including removing identification labels, fabricating verification records, purposefully hiding transaction histories, and using personal networks to trade artifacts with unclear origins. At least 47 items that Rick bought through middlemen in Europe and Asia between 2017 and February 2022 were suspected of being involved in smuggling, according to a study from the International Heritage Investigation Agency, or IHC. 3 of these objects were found to have been stolen from museums in Italy, Cambodia, and Ukraine. Experts questioned if we were all responsible for the commercialization of culture under television's influence. Even while there are no checks on whether the transactions that are shown are lawful, several opponents said that the reality television market has long permitted the rationalization of ethics, transforming programs like Pawn Stars into simply entertainment items. UCLA physician Carla Jensen advocated for the creation of a new legal framework for culturally commercial television shows. Representatives from 17 nations came together to suggest a thorough examination of every relic that has been shown on Pawn Stars in the previous 15 years at the International Council of Museums, ICOM Symposium in Geneva. The search for missing antiquities is a worldwide effort. A global task team was established by UNESCO, Interpol, and other international organizations to catalog and track down items connected to Rick. In addition to legal issues, media outlets, scholarly debates, and the cultural preservation community were all dominated by ethical problems. A novel study model called the Harrison effect was created by the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business to examine the long-term harm that results when people sacrifice morality in order to maximize their reputation and make quick money. In many curricula, Rick is now used as a warning example alongside people like Bob Iger, Oprah Winfrey, and Elon Musk. Across the country, museums started modernizing their procedures for confirming the origin of imported antiquities. All artifact transactions above $500 would have to pass through a federal verification system, akin to international financial processes according to a proposed federal measure called the Cultural Transaction Integrity Act. 64% of respondents to a USA Today survey of more than 15,000 individuals said that Rick Harrison's punishment was appropriate and required for deterrence. 21% thought the punishment was severe yet appropriate. Just 8% were adamantly against it, and 7% were undecided. Despite the disagreement, it was evident that after seeing the case's evidence and repercussions, the public's perspective had changed. Interestingly, Rick never downplayed his experience or understanding. He didn't say he was ignorant or a victim. According to his legal team, Rick behaved with no malicious purpose and in accordance with his professional knowledge of the legal gray zones. But this poses a more significant query. Is knowledge more reprehensible than ignorance when it is applied carelessly? In addition to the fact that the case was criminal in nature, this question has made Rick's conviction a cultural landmark by exposing the negative aspects of applying intelligence without moral restraints. By placing it in the proper hands, I want to preserve heritage. The self-contradictory term that Rick used in several interviews still reverberates. In addition to being a personal failure, his collapse serves as a warning for a time when knowledge becomes worthless when motivated by selfish goals. Rick said in a 2021 interview, "Those who appreciate it, but in the public's opinion, the phrase is now vacuous and foolish." In addition to a life sentence, the cost of that defense was the loss of the reputation, prestige, and cultural clout he had spent decades cultivating. From the viewpoint of the public, the media, and the cultural sector, Rick Harrison's narrative appears to have just begun, even if the verdict has been handed down. Serving a sentence has evolved beyond merely being a legal penalty in a culture that is dominated by branding, image, and the punishing power of social media. It is also a method by which society decides to define or remember an individual. Additionally, Rick Harrison's case is still open. Independent podcasts and cultural political media started examining his narrative as a representation of a systematic victim within the first week following the decision. Freelance journalist Mike Rainier questioned on the Freedom Voices network if Rick Harrison's reputation as a practical businessman was shattered by an antiquated legal system that couldn't keep up with online sales. In only 5 days, his video had almost 4,500,000 views. Culture Reset, a podcast by Kayla Duran, examined Rick as a cultural tragedy in which the distinction between entertainment and instruction had become hazy. The phrase Rick effect first appeared on Reddit and X, previously Twitter, to describe popular personalities who lost favor but still had a devoted following. In movies, Rick is a dying star. The independent documentary team Horned, The Fall of a Cultural Broker, which was reconstructed in New York, said that it will be released in the first part of 2026. In addition to exploring the trial, the movie looks at Rick's impact on the world antiques market, how reality TV idolizes common people, and the negative effects of privatizing historical memory. In just 3 weeks, the project raised more than $1,200,000 on Kickstarter. In the meanwhile, Rick's legal team is submitting an appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is anticipated to be heard in the second quarter of 2026. They contend that a life sentence ignores his long-term cultural achievements and is excessive for a non-violent offense. They also suggest a regenerative model. Under supervision, Rick might provide community service in museums or educational institutions. This is viewed as a possible course of action if society chooses restorative justice over harsh punishment, even though the likelihood of success is yet unknown. Videos of Rick from previous Pawn Stars episodes have received millions of views on TikTok and YouTube. Typical remarks include something like he was too real for this fake world, or he knew too much so they silenced him. This is a reflection of how millennials and Gen Z view Rick. not totally as a criminal, but as a victim of those in positions of authority. In the third space, Rick's persona is being reshaped such that he represents the complexity of modern society, rather than being a hero or a criminal. Rick is a flawed yet significant reflection of society. As Harvard Kennedy sociologist Linda Micro noted, "We have entered a time where perfection is no longer demanded. People who have fallen but still have a message are sought for by the people." In this sense, Rick may still be resurrected in the cultural realm as a warning figure even after he was condemned. To teach society a living lesson about the thin border between knowledge, power, and ethics, not to be pardoned. The debate has continued even within the broadcast business. Closed-door discussions are being held to explore the possibility of reviving or restructuring the Pawn Stars brand, according to an anonymous source from Abusi Networks. The goal is not to restore the brand's previous image, but rather to make it a more intricate cultural legacy that is better suited to the demands of contemporary societal reflection. Even in Incarcerated, the public continues to follow Rick Harrison. Rick Harrison has been selected as the pilot case for a new television project that the parent company of the History Channel is proposing to produce in the form of a documentary that explores the ethical, legal, and sociological repercussions that popular personalities confront. The project has not been formally verified and is currently in the pre-research phase. Rick could make a comeback to the spotlight, but it won't be the same as how viewers used to know him. His hallmark remark, "The best I can do is," and the days of grinning next to priceless antiques are long gone. His comeback may instead be a series of lectures on accountability, errors, and the repercussions of celebrity in the digital era, or it might be a debate show about the less positive aspects of the cultural commerce sector. The public will make the final decision regardless of the format. A living example, or a name permanently etched in court documents, is Rick Harrison. The narrative for today stops there. For more behind-the-scenes tales that are upending the cultural landscape, don't forget to press the notification bell, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the upcoming video.